key to the control room was heavier than I expected. Brass old with a rubber tag that read CR1 in faded permanent marker. Marcus handed it to me along with a clipboard, a radio clipped to channel 9, and a thermos of coffee that was already going cold. "You'll do the midnight to 8 shift," he said. "Alone. That's how it works here." We stood in the employee lot of Dunmore Dam, 300 yards from the control room itself. It was October, and the wind coming off the reservoir carried the smell of wet concrete and decaying leaves. The dam stretched to our left, a curved wall of gray holding back 60 million gallons. Below us, the valley sat in darkness. "Alone for 8 hours?" I asked. "Phone's dead half the time anyway, radio works. You'll check the instrumentation every 30 minutes, log the readings, and monitor the spillway gates. If something's wrong with the turbines, you call me. If something's wrong with the structure, you hit the emergency line." He looked at me. "You worked at Richfield Dam, right?" 2 years, day shift. This is different." I waited for him to explain. He didn't. Marcus was 50-something with the kind of face that had seen weather. He'd been at Dunmore for 26 years. The ad I'd answered said they needed overnight coverage, that the pay was double the standard rate. I needed double the standard rate. My ex-wife had made sure of that. "The control room's on the east access road," Marcus continued. "You walk past the auxiliary building, past the transformer yard, then you'll see it. Concrete box, reinforced door, windows on 3 sides. You'll have a clear view of the spillway, the intake towers, and the maintenance road." Sounds straightforward? It is, mostly. He shifted his weight. "You'll find a binder on the desk. Operational guidelines. Read them before you do anything else." "Standard procedure stuff?" "Something like that." The way he said it made my neck prickle, but I needed this job. $14 an hour, overnight differential, and they were desperate enough not to ask too many questions about the gap in my resume. Marcus walked me to the access road. Gravel crunched under our boots. Floodlights lit the dam face in patches, but the rest of the facility sat in pools of shadow. The auxiliary building was dark. The transformer yard hummed with a frequency I could feel in my teeth. The control room sat another 100 yards past that. It was exactly as he'd described, a concrete box maybe 15 feet by 20 with a reinforced steel door and windows that looked out over the reservoir, the spillway, and the valley below. A single light burned inside, yellow and dim. "Door locks from the inside," Marcus said. "You'll want to lock it." "Security issue?" "Just lock it." He handed me a small LED flashlight, checked his watch, and turned back toward the lot. I watched him go, his shape dissolving into the dark near the transformer yard. Then I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The control room smelled like old coffee and electrical heat. A metal desk sat against the far wall, flanked by instrumentation panels with analog dials and LED readouts, a swivel chair with duct tape on the armrest, a microwave on a filing cabinet, a water cooler in the corner, the kind with a 5-gallon bottle on top, 3 windows, one facing the reservoir, one facing the spillway, one facing the maintenance road and the woods beyond. I locked the door behind me. The deadbolt was solid, institutional. It made a satisfying click. The binder sat in the center of the desk, black vinyl with a peeling label that read Operational Guidelines, CR1. I set down my thermos and opened it. The first page was a standard shift checklist: log in, verify radio channel, check instrumentation, record reservoir level, monitor spillway gate positions, check turbine flow rates. I'd done all this before at Richfield. Different dam, same procedures. The second page was different. It was handwritten in blue ink, the letters neat and precise. At the top, someone had written, "Additional protocols. Midnight shift only." I sat down in the taped chair and started reading. The list had 14 items. 1. Lock the door immediately upon entry. Verify the lock every hour by testing the handle. Do not unlock the door for any reason between the hours of midnight and 6 a.m., even if someone knocks. 2. Keep the radio on channel 9 at all times. If you hear transmission on another channel, do not respond. Return to channel 9. 3. At 12:30 a.m., verify that the spillway light is on. If it is off, turn it on using the panel switch. If it will not turn on, note the time and do not attempt to turn it on again until 1:45 a.m. 4. Between 1:50 a.m. and 2:10 a.m., do not look directly at the maintenance road. If you must face that direction, keep your eyes on the instrumentation panel. 5. If you hear footsteps on the roof, do not go outside to investigate. The roof is not accessible and no maintenance is scheduled during overnight hours. 6. At 2:30 a.m., perform a full instrumentation check. Record all readings in the log. If any reading is identical to the previous reading down to the decimal, check again in 5 minutes. If it is still identical, radio Marcus on channel 9 using the phrase, "We have a static reading." 7. Do not accept deliveries or visitors between midnight and 6 a.m. If someone approaches the control room, observe them through the window but do not open the door or acknowledge them verbally. 8. If the spillway light turns off on its own between 2:30 a.m. and 3:15 a.m., leave it off. Do not attempt to turn it back on until 3:15 a.m. 9. The water cooler will make a clicking sound every 8 to 12 minutes. This is normal. If it clicks in a steady rhythm faster than this, unplug it and do not use it for the remainder of your shift. 10. At 4 a.m., check the reservoir window. If you see a light moving on the water, note the time and direction. Do not watch it for more than 30 seconds. 11. If your radio transmits static or a voice you do not recognize, switch to channel 6 for exactly 2 minutes, then return to channel 9. Do not respond to the voice. 12. Between 4:30 a.m. and 5 a.m., you may hear knocking on the door. Count the knocks. If there are 3, ignore them. If there are 5, ignore them. If there are 7, respond by saying logged, but do not unlock the door. 13. At 5:30 a.m., verify all window latches. If any latch is unlocked, lock it and make a note in the log with the time. 14. If you see someone in the maintenance uniform standing on the maintenance road between the hours of 3 a.m. and 6 a.m., do not attempt to communicate with them. They are not on shift. Below the list, in the same handwriting, a final note. Follow these exactly. I did not, and I lost 2 weeks I can't account for. J. I read the list twice. Then I looked at the clock on the wall. 11:58 p.m. My first instinct was to call Marcus and ask what kind of joke this was. But the handwriting was too careful, the rules too specific. And Marcus had told me to read the guidelines before doing anything else. He'd known what was in here. I turned to the instrumentation panel and began the standard checks. Reservoir level, 612.3 feet. Spillway gates, closed, position 0. Turbine 1 flow rate, 42 cubic meters per second. Turbine 2, 41.8. Discharge pressure nominal. Water temperature 47 degrees. I logged everything in the binder, noting the date and time, October 14th, 11:59 p.m. The radio on my belt hissed quietly. Channel 9. I checked the dial to be sure. At midnight exactly, I tested the door handle. Locked. The control room sat in a pocket of light surrounded by darkness. Through the reservoir window, I could see the intake towers rising from the black water, their red warning lights blinking in slow sequence. The spillway stretched to my right, a concrete apron that dropped into shadow. Beyond the maintenance road, the woods pressed close, a solid wall of pine and oak. I made coffee in the microwave using a packet of Instant I found in the desk drawer. It tasted like hot water and regret, but it was hot. I wrapped my hands around the cup and looked at the binder again. Rule 3. At 12:30 a.m., verify the spillway light. I had 28 minutes to wait. The water cooler clicked. I counted in my head. 9 minutes later, it clicked again. At 12:15 a.m., I did another instrumentation check. Reservoir level, 612.3 feet. Turbine 1, 42.1 cubic meters per second. Turbine 2, 41.8. I logged it. At 12:30 a.m., I checked the spillway light. It was off. I found the switch on the panel, a toggle labeled SLX. I flipped it up. Through the spillway window, the light came on, a harsh sodium glow that lit the concrete in shades of yellow and gray. It illuminated about 50 yards of the spillway surface and the edge of the woods beyond. I sat down and waited. The minutes stretched. I checked my watch every few minutes, then forced myself to stop. At 12:45 a.m., I logged another instrumentation reading. Everything nominal. At 1 a.m., I tested the door lock, still secure. At 1:30 a.m., I heard something on the roof. It was a soft sound, like footsteps, but irregular. Not quite walking, scraping maybe, or dragging. Something heavy moving slowly across the concrete above me. I looked up at the ceiling panels, water-stained and gray. Rule 5. If you hear footsteps on the roof, do not go outside to investigate. I stayed in my chair. The sound moved from one end of the roof to the other, slow and deliberate, then stopped directly overhead. I could hear my own breathing. The sound stayed there for maybe 30 seconds, then resumed moving. It reached the far end and stopped. I waited 5 minutes. It didn't return. At 1:45 a.m., I checked the spillway light. Still on. I logged it. At 1:50 a.m., I looked at the maintenance road. I caught myself just in time. The clock read 1:52 a.m. Rule 4. Between 1:50 a.m. and 2:10 a.m., don't look at the maintenance road. I turned my chair to face the instrumentation panel and kept my eyes on the dials. Reservoir level, 612.2 feet. I wrote it down. I focused on the turbine readouts, the pressure gauges, the spillway gate indicators. I studied the panel's layout, memorizing the position of each dial and switch. The minutes crawled. At 2:10 a.m., I allowed myself to glance toward the maintenance road window. The road was empty, gravel and darkness in the tree line beyond. Nothing moved. I exhaled and realized I'd been holding my breath. At 2:30 a.m., I performed the full instrumentation check as directed. Reservoir level, 612.2 feet. Spillway gates closed, position 0. Turbine 1 flow rate, 42.0 cubic meters per second. Turbine 2, 41.7. Discharge pressure nominal. Water temperature 47 degrees. Everything looked normal, but when I compared the turbine 1 flow rate to the previous reading at 12:45 a.m., they were identical. 42.0 cubic meters per second exactly. I waited 5 minutes as the rule specified and checked again. 42.0. I picked up the radio. "Marcus, this is CR1, we have a static reading." The radio crackled. "Copy, CR1. Which instrument?" "Turbine 1 flow rate, identical across 2 checks, 5 minutes apart." "Noted in the log. If it happens again, call me back." "Copy." I wrote it down. Aero 235, turbine 1 static. Reading 42.0 CMS. Reported to supervisor. The water cooler clicked. I counted. 8 minutes later, it clicked again. At 2:48 a.m., the spillway light turned off. I looked at the clock, then at Rule 8. If the spillway light turns off on its own between 2:30 a.m. and 3:15 a.m., leave it off. Do not attempt to turn it back on until 3:15 a.m. I left it off. The spillway dropped into darkness. I could still see the shape of it, a gray absence against the blacker woods, but the details vanished. The control room suddenly felt more isolated. I realized how much I'd been relying on that light, how it had given me a sense of connection to the rest of the facility. Now it was just me in a concrete box surrounded by darkness. I checked my watch every few minutes. Time moved like water through stone. At 3 a.m., I tested the door lock, still secure. At 3:15 a.m., I flipped the spillway light switch. The light came back on immediately. At 3:23 a.m., I did another full instrumentation check. Everything normal. Turbine 1 was reading 42.3 now, different from before. At 3:41 a.m., something moved on the water. I saw it through the reservoir window, a light, pale and greenish, drifting slowly from left to right about 200 yards out. It didn't bob like a boat light or a buoy. It moved smooth and steady just below the surface, illuminating the water from beneath. Rule 10. Note the time and direction. Don't watch for more than 30 seconds. I noted it in the log. 0341. Light observed on reservoir surface moving east to west approximately 200 yards from shore. I watched it for 20 seconds, counting in my head, then forced myself to look away. When I checked again 5 minutes later, it was gone. At 4:33 a.m., someone knocked on the door. 3 knocks, sharp and clear. I didn't move. I stared at the door and counted to 60. Rule 12. 3 knocks, ignore. 5 knocks, ignore. 7 knocks, acknowledge but don't open. At 4:41 a.m., 5 knocks. I kept my eyes on the instrumentation panel and logged another reading. Reservoir level, 612.1 feet. At 4:56 a.m., 7 knocks. Logged, I said. The knocking stopped. I sat in the chair, my hands shaking slightly, and waited for the shift to end. I checked the door lock at 5 a.m., still secure. At 5:30 a.m., I checked the window latches as directed. Reservoir window, locked. Spillway window, locked. Maintenance road window, unlocked. My stomach dropped. I locked it and wrote in the log, 0530, maintenance road window latch found unlocked, secured. I hadn't opened that window, I was sure of it. I'd been in the chair all night. At 6 a.m., I unlocked the door. The sky was starting to lighten in the east, a pale gray that made the reservoir look like hammered metal. I did a final instrumentation check, logged everything, and clipped the radio back on my belt. Marcus arrived at 7:53 a.m. He looked at me, then at the log. He read it slowly, tracing each entry with his finger. How was it? I followed the list. He nodded. Good, that's good. The maintenance road window was unlocked, I said. I didn't unlock it. It happens. What do you mean it happens? Marcus closed the binder. Same time tomorrow? I need to know what's going on here. You need a job, he said. And we need someone on midnights. You follow the list, you're fine, that's all there is. He took the radio and the key to lock up the control room. I walked back to my car in the growing light and drove home. I lived 40 minutes away in the apartment complex that smelled like fried food and defeated ambition. I microwaved a frozen breakfast burrito, took a shower, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep. I came back that night at 11:45 p.m. Marcus handed me the key, the radio, and a different thermos. Same as last night, he said. You did good. The list, I said. Who wrote it? Someone who learned the hard way. What happened to them? Marcus looked toward the control room, a dark shape in the distance. They stopped following the rules. Didn't end well. What does that mean? It means follow the rules. I walked the access road alone. The gravel sounded too loud under my boots. I unlocked the control room, stepped inside, locked the door behind me, and sat down at the desk. The binder was open to a new page. Someone had added a note in different handwriting, black ink this time, letters smaller and more cramped. If the reservoir light appears before 3:30 a.m., close the blinds on the reservoir window. Do not open them until dawn. Below that, in the same hand, if you see your own vehicle in the employee lot when you arrive, do not enter the control room. Return to your vehicle and leave immediately. I added them to my mental checklist. 15 rules now. 16. At midnight, I started my rounds. The night unfolded like the first one. Instrumentation checks every 30 minutes, the water cooler clicking at irregular intervals, the spillway light going dark at 2:42 a.m. and coming back on at 3:15 a.m. At 1:37 a.m., I heard the footsteps on the roof again. Heavier this time, more deliberate. I kept my eyes on the desk and logged the time. At 2:30 a.m., I performed the full instrumentation check. This time, turbine 2 showed a static reading. I radioed Marcus. He acknowledged and told me to monitor it. At 2:51 a.m., I heard my ex-wife's voice on the radio. "Help me, I'm at the dam, I don't know where I am." I grabbed the radio off my belt. Channel 9. The voice kept coming, thin and desperate. "Please, I need help, I'm lost, I can't find my car." Rule 11. If the radio transmits a voice you don't recognize, switch to channel 6 for 2 minutes. But I recognized the voice. That was the problem. "I know you're there, please, I just need you to open the door." I turned the dial to channel 6. Static filled my ear, harsh and white. I set a timer on my watch. 2 minutes felt like 20. I stared at the instrumentation panel and tried not to think about how my ex-wife sounded scared, how she'd said my name once toward the end. When the timer beeped, I switched back to channel 9. Silence. At 4:18 a.m., I saw the light on the water. This time it was closer, maybe 100 yards out, and it pulsed slowly like something breathing. I noted it in the log and looked away after 15 seconds. At 5:30 a.m., all 3 window latches were unlocked. I locked them one by one and logged it. My hands were steadier tonight, but the fact that all 3 were unlocked bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Marcus came at 7:50 a.m. He read the log, nodded, and handed me an envelope with my first week's pay. Cash, 20s and 10s, the bills worn soft. "You're doing fine," he said. "Keep it up." "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. 26 years? "And the rules?" "They've always been there, they just get longer." "Why?" Marcus looked at me with something like pity. "Because people don't listen." On my 3rd night, I brought a notebook. I wanted to track patterns, see if there was logic to the timing. I was still thinking like an engineer, like there was a system to understand. That night, the footsteps on the roof came at 1:23 a.m., 14 minutes earlier than before. The spillway light went out at 2:39 a.m., 9 minutes earlier. The voice on the radio came at 3:07 a.m., and this time it was my mother's voice, and she'd been dead for 6 years. I switched to channel 6 without hesitation. On my 4th night, the knocking pattern changed. 3 knocks at 4:28 a.m., 5 knocks at 4:36 a.m., 7 knocks at 4:59 a.m., and when I said logged, I heard footsteps walking away from the door, crunching on gravel. I added it to the log. On my 5th night, a man in a maintenance uniform appeared on the maintenance road at 3:34 a.m. He stood just beyond the tree line, illuminated by the spillway light. He wore the standard uniform, gray coveralls, yellow safety vest, white hard hat. He didn't move. He just stood there, facing the control room. Rule 14. Do not attempt to communicate. I watched him for 30 seconds. He stood perfectly still, his face in shadow under the hard hat. Then slowly he raised one hand and waved. I turned away and focused on the instrumentation panel. Reservoir level, 611.9 feet. I wrote it down with hands that wanted to shake. When I looked back 10 minutes later, he was gone. At 4:45 a.m., 7 knocks on the door. "Logged," I said. A voice came from outside, muffled by the steel. "I need to check the spillway controls." I didn't respond. "Sir, I need to access the panel. It's urgent." I stayed silent, watching the door handle. The voice waited, then said, "Are you experiencing equipment failure? I have the maintenance codes." I logged the time and the words. The voice faded. Footsteps crunched on gravel, moving away toward the spillway. At 6 a.m., I unlocked the door and checked outside. No one. No footprints in the gravel that I could distinguish from my own. Marcus arrived on time. He looked more tired than usual, shadows under his eyes. "You saw someone," he said. It wasn't a question. "On the maintenance road at 3:34 a.m. And?" "I didn't communicate." "Good." He closed the binder. "They'll keep trying. Don't give them anything." "Who are they?" Marcus picked up the radio and key. "Don't know. Don't want to know. Neither should you." On my 6th night, I found a loose page tucked into the back of the binder. It was old, yellowed at the edges, and covered in cramped handwriting. Different from the other editions. Older. It read, "Supply inventory must be conducted at 01 on 0, 03 on 0, and 05 on 11. Count all items. If the count changes by more than 2 items between checks, document which items and radio Marcus immediately. Do not consume any supplies that have appeared since your last count." I looked at the desk. There was a cardboard box in the corner I hadn't paid much attention to. I opened it. 12 granola bars, 6 bottles of water, 3 packages of batteries, 2 emergency flares, 1 first aid kit, 5 road flares in a canvas bag. I wrote down the inventory in my notebook. 010, 12 granola bars, 6 water bottles, 3 battery packs, 2 emergency flares, 1 first aid kit, 5 road flares. At 3 a.m., I counted again. 11 granola bars, 6 bottles of water, 3 packages of batteries, 2 emergency flares, 1 first aid kit, 5 road flares. 1 granola bar was missing. I radioed Marcus. "CR1, that's within tolerance," he said. "Continue monitoring." At 5 a.m., I counted again. 11 granola bars, 7 bottles of water, 3 packages of batteries, 2 emergency flares, 1 first aid kit, 5 road flares. 1 water bottle had appeared. I radioed Marcus again. He told me to log it and not to drink the new water bottle. I marked it with a pen. "Do not consume." On my 7th night, I arrived to find the control room door already unlocked. I stood on the access road for a full minute, staring at the door. My hand hovered over the radio, ready to call Marcus. Then I remembered Rule 16. If you see your own vehicle in the employee lot when you arrive, do not enter the control room. I turned and looked back at the lot. My car was there, alone under the security light. No duplicate. I entered the control room. Everything looked normal. The binder sat on the desk, open to the standard checklist. The instrumentation panel hummed quietly. I locked the door behind me and tested it 3 times. At 12:15 a.m., I found a new note in the binder. If you find the door unlocked when you arrive, check the reservoir window blinds immediately. If they are closed, do not open them until you complete the full midnight equipment check. The reservoir window blinds were closed. I hadn't closed them. I did the full equipment check with my back to the reservoir window. Reservoir level, spillway gates, turbine flow rates, discharge pressure, water temperature. Everything nominal. I logged it all. At 12:35 a.m., I opened the blinds. The reservoir looked normal. Black water, intake towers, blinking red lights. I watched for 3 minutes. Nothing moved. At 1:53 a.m., during the forbidden window for looking at the maintenance road, I heard gravel crunching outside. I kept my eyes on the instrumentation panel. The footsteps circled the control room once, twice, 3 times. Then they stopped at the door. The handle didn't move. No knocking, just the presence of something waiting. At 2:10 a.m., the footsteps moved away. On my 8th night, I brought a camera. Just a cheap digital one from a pawn shop. I figured if I couldn't explain what was happening, maybe I could at least document it. At 3:49 a.m., the light appeared on the reservoir. I noted the time and took 3 photos through the window before looking away. When I checked the camera later, all 3 photos showed nothing but black water and intake towers. The light didn't appear in any of them. I deleted the photos and didn't bring the camera again. On my 9th night, the lights went out. It happened at 2:23 a.m., sudden and total. The control room dropped into darkness. The instrumentation panel went dark. The spillway light vanished. Even the intake tower warning lights blinked out. I sat in the chair and waited for my eyes to adjust. The emergency protocols. I fumbled for the binder, found my flashlight, and opened to the back pages. There it was, in red ink. Emergency protocols. Power failure. 1. Remain in the control room. Do not attempt to restore power yourself. 2. Use the flashlight sparingly. Batteries must last until dawn. 3. Do not use the radio unless you hear 3 short beeps on channel 9. This indicates Marcus is attempting contact. 4. If you hear voices outside, do not respond, even if they claim to be maintenance or emergency personnel. 5. If the door handle moves, brace the door with the filing cabinet. I read them twice by flashlight, then turned it off to save batteries. The darkness was absolute. I could hear the water cooler clicking in the corner, the wind against the windows, the distant sound of water moving through the dam's turbines, quieter now, but still there. The dam was still operating. I sat in perfect blackness and listened. At 2:48 a.m., the door handle moved. I heard it clearly, metal on metal, a slow testing of the lock. Not violent, just methodical. Testing to see if it would turn. I stood up, grabbed the filing cabinet, and dragged it against the door. It scraped across the concrete floor with a sound that made my teeth ache. The handle stopped moving. I sat back down, my flashlight in my hand but not turned on. At 3:12 a.m., I heard footsteps, multiple sets circling the control room. They moved from the reservoir side to the spillway side to the maintenance road side and back again. Around and around, never stopping, never changing pace. I counted the rotations, 7 complete circles before they stopped at 3:26 a.m. At 3:41 a.m., someone knocked on the door. I counted. 11 knocks. The list said 3, 5, or 7, nothing about 11. I didn't respond. At 4:36 a.m., someone knocked again. I counted carefully. 7 knocks. Logged, I said into the darkness. A voice came from outside, very soft. Thank you. I sat frozen. No one was supposed to respond. The rules never mentioned a voice after acknowledgement. At 5:41 a.m., the emergency lights came back on, pale and flickering but enough to see by. The instrumentation panel remained dark, but I could make out the shapes in the control room, the filing cabinet against the door, the water cooler in the corner, the windows showing the first gray hints of dawn. At 6:13 a.m., the main power returned. Everything hummed back to life at once. Lights, panel, the spillway light outside. I checked the instruments. Everything nominal. I moved the filing cabinet back to its place and unlocked the door. Marcus arrived early at 7:32 a.m. He looked at the filing cabinet's fresh scrape marks on the floor. Power failure, he said. Yes. You followed the protocols. Yes, but someone said thank you after the 7 knocks. Marcus's face went still. Write it in the log. Exact time, exact words. I did. He read it 3 times. That's new, he finally said. I'll note it. What does it mean? It means keep following the rules. On my 10th through 13th nights, the pattern established itself. The footsteps came earlier each night. The spillway light failed at different times. The voice on the radio cycled through people I knew. My ex-wife, my mother, my college roommate, my father who'd left when I was 7. I switched to channel 6 each time. The man in the maintenance uniform appeared 3 more times, always between 3:30 a.m. and 4 a.m., always waving once. I stopped looking after the first few seconds. The supply inventory changed in small ways. Items disappeared and reappeared. I marked everything that appeared and never consumed it. By the 13th night, there were 4 marked water bottles and 3 marked granola bars in the box. On my 14th night, I found a new page in the binder. It was handwritten in green ink, shaky letters. Amendment: do not open the reservoir window between midnight and dawn for any reason. The seal must hold. I checked the reservoir window latch, locked. I tested it 3 times. At 1:14 a.m., something hit the glass, a soft thump like a hand pressed flat against the pane. I looked up. Nothing there. Just my reflection in the dark glass and the intake towers beyond, their red lights blinking in sequence. At 1:26 a.m., another thump, then another. A pattern. 3 thumps, pause, 5 thumps, pause, 7 thumps. The knocking pattern from the door translated to the window. I kept my eyes on the instrumentation panel and logged the time. The thumping continued until 2:18 a.m., then stopped. At 3:43 a.m., I saw a light on the water. This time it was close, maybe 50 feet from the window, and it wasn't moving. It sat just below the surface, steady and bright, illuminating something beneath. I could see shapes in the water, dark and indistinct. I looked away at 27 seconds. At 4:56 a.m., 7 knocks on the door. "Logged," I said. Silence, then a voice, very soft. "Thank you." I wrote it in the log, 04:56, 7 knocks. Voice said thank you after acknowledgement. Did not open door, second occurrence. Marcus read it the next morning and nodded slowly. "That's new," he said again. "You said that last time." "Because it is. Every time." He looked at me. "It's getting different." "Is it getting worse?" He closed the binder. "Different isn't worse. Just follow the rules." On my 15th night, someone left a cassette tape on the desk. It hadn't been there when I'd locked up at the end of my last shift. I was sure of it. But there it was. A cassette tape in a clear case labeled in the same blue ink as the original rule list. The label read, "Listen at 02:30. There was a cassette player in the drawer, old battery-powered, the kind I hadn't seen since high school. I loaded the tape and waited. At 2:30 a.m., I pressed play. The tape hissed with static for a few seconds, then a voice, male, tired. "If you're listening to this, you've made it 2 weeks. That's better than most. My name is Jonathan. I worked midnights here for 4 months before I stopped following the rules. This is what I learned." The voice paused. I heard breathing, slow and deliberate. "The dam holds back more than water. I don't know when it started or why, but something is contained here. Multiple somethings. They're drawn to the control room during the midnight shift because that's when the barrier is thinnest. The rules aren't arbitrary, they're a protocol for maintaining the seal." More static. Then, "The footsteps on the roof aren't footsteps, the voices aren't voices, the man in the maintenance uniform isn't a man. They're impressions, echoes of things that tried to cross over and failed. As long as you follow the rules, you maintain the boundary. The moment you break one, you weaken it." The tape hissed for several seconds. I broke Rule 14. I communicated with the man on the maintenance road. I asked him what he needed. He told me to open the door. I didn't, but I'd acknowledged him, and that was enough. I lost consciousness at my desk. When I woke up, it was 2 weeks later. Marcus found me here, unresponsive. The doctors couldn't explain it. I couldn't explain it, but I remembered something. Another pause. Longer this time. While I was gone, I was somewhere else, under the water. With the others who didn't follow the rules, they were waiting, all of them. They showed me what happens when the seal breaks completely. If you're smart, you'll quit after 6 months. If you're like me, you'll stay until you can't anymore. Either way, follow the rules, every single one, no exceptions. The tape clicked off. I sat in the silence for a full minute, then ejected the tape and put it back in its case. I logged the time and contents in the binder. 0230, cassette tape found on desk. Message from previous operator, Jonathan. Content suggests containment function of facility. Advises strict rule compliance. At 2:47 a.m., the spillway light went out. I left it off until 3:15 a.m., as directed. At 3:51 a.m., the light appeared on the reservoir, closer than ever, maybe 30 feet from the window. I noted the time, looked for 10 seconds, and turned away. But in those 10 seconds, I saw what was beneath it. Faces, not many, maybe a dozen. Pressed against something, looking up, mouths open. I didn't look back. On my 21st night, I brought the cassette player home and listened to the tape again in my apartment. In daylight, with traffic sounds outside and my neighbor's television bleeding through the walls, Jonathan's voice sounded less ominous. Just tired, resigned. I made a list of questions I wanted to ask Marcus. I never asked them. On my 22nd night, a woman appeared on the maintenance road at 3:37 a.m. She wore a maintenance uniform, but something about her stance was wrong, too rigid. She raised her hand and waved, the same mechanical gesture as the man. I logged it and looked away. On my 25th night, I heard my own voice on the radio. CR1, this is Marcus. I'm coming to check on you. Unlock the door. I switched to channel 6 immediately. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the radio. On my 30th night, I found a new amendment. At 0130, check the reservoir depth gauge. If the reading shows a decrease of more than 0.5 feet from the previous check, radio Marcus immediately and move the filing cabinet against the door. Do not move it until daylight. That night at 1:30 a.m., the reservoir level had dropped by 1.3 feet. I radioed Marcus. CR1 to base. Reservoir level drop of 1.3 feet since midnight check. Copy, CR1. Secure the door and maintain position. I dragged the filing cabinet against the door and sat down. The reservoir level continued to drop. By 2:30 a.m., it was down 3.7 feet. By 3:30 a.m., 5.1 feet. Through the reservoir window, I could see the water line receding, exposing concrete that had been submerged. The intake towers stood taller, and in the growing margin of exposed lakebed, shapes began to emerge. I forced myself not to look directly at them. At 4:17 a.m., the water level stabilized. At 4:43 a.m., it began to rise. By 6 a.m., it was back to 612.3 feet. Marcus arrived at 7:45 a.m. He looked at the log, then at me. You didn't look at the lake bed, he said. No. Good. What would I have seen? Things that tried to cross and got stuck halfway. The reservoir keeps them submerged. When the level drops, they surface briefly. He closed the binder. You don't want to see them clearly. How often does this happen? Once a month, roughly. You'll learn to anticipate it. There are signs. He put the binder under his arm. You're doing better than anyone we've had in 3 years. Keep it up. On my 37th night, the power failed again. This time it happened at 3:08 a.m. I was ready. I had the emergency protocols memorized. I dragged the filing cabinet against the door before the footsteps even started. They came at 3:23 a.m. More of them this time. I counted 8 distinct sets of footsteps, all circling the control room in perfect synchronization. At 4:02 a.m., the knocking started. 7 knocks. Logged, I said. Thank you, came the voice. Then, we appreciate your service. I logged it. 04:02, 7 knocks during power failure. Voice said thank you and we appreciate your service. Did not open door. 3rd and 4th occurrence of post-acknowledgement speech. The power came back at 5:33 a.m. On my 41st night, I found a package on the desk. Brown paper tied with string, no markings. Inside was a leather journal, old and water-stained. The first page read, Log of Harold Sims, Control Room Operator, 1987-1989. I read it during the quiet hours. Harold had experienced everything I had, plus incidents I hadn't encountered yet. He documented a night when the instrumentation panel showed impossible readings. Negative flow rates, reservoir levels above the dam's maximum capacity, water temperature of 100 degrees. He documented a night when something had gotten into the control room through the air vent. He'd sealed it with duct tape and caulk, and the vent remained sealed to this day. I'd never questioned it. His final entry was dated March 15, 1989. I opened the reservoir window tonight. I had to know. I was wrong to think knowing would help. Tomorrow I will train my replacement. I hope they're smarter than I was. There were no entries after that. I added the journal to the binder and continued my shift. On my 48th night, I started to understand the pattern. The footsteps came earlier when the reservoir level was higher. The voices on the radio were more frequent during the new moon. The man in the maintenance uniform appeared most often on Thursdays. The spillway light failed more reliably during the second half of my shift. I made charts in my notebook. I tracked correlations. I was still thinking like an engineer, but now I was engineering my compliance with the rules, finding ways to anticipate the anomalies. It helped, marginally. On my 53rd night, a child's voice came on the radio. Daddy? Daddy, where are you? I didn't have children. I switched to Channel 6. On my 57th night, the supply inventory showed 12 marked items. Things that had appeared and been marked, do not consume. They sat in the box like landmines waiting for someone to forget. On my 61st night, I received a call from Marcus at 2:15 a.m. The radio crackled. CR1, this is base. We have a trainee starting next week. You'll be training them on their first 3 nights. They'll arrive at midnight. Copy that. What's their name? Sarah. She worked at Millbrook Dam for a year. Day shift. She know about the rules? She will. On my 63rd night, I worked alone for the last time before Sarah's arrival. I performed every check perfectly. I logged every anomaly. At 3:43 a.m., the light appeared on the water, and I saw what was beneath it more clearly than ever before. Faces. Dozens of them now, hundreds maybe. Pressed against the underside of the surface like people drowning in reverse. All looking up, all waiting. One of them was Jonathan, the voice from the cassette. I looked away at 29 seconds. At 4:56 a.m., 7 knocks. Logged, I said. Thank you, came the voice. We'll see you tomorrow. I wrote it in the log and didn't let my hand shake. Sarah arrived on my 64th night at 11:57 p.m. She was younger than me, maybe 30, with the kind of tired eyes that said she'd seen things go wrong before. Marcus had briefed her on the basics, but she looked skeptical. So I just follow this list? She asked, looking at the binder. Exactly. No interpretation, no second guessing. If it says don't look at the maintenance road between 1:50 and 2:10 a.m., you don't look. What happens if I do? I don't know. I've never broken the rules. She looked at me. Never? Never. We went through the first night together. I showed her the instrumentation panel, the radio protocols, the supply inventory system. When the footsteps came on the roof at 1:33 a.m., she looked up. Don't go outside, I said. I wasn't planning to. At 3:41 a.m., the light appeared on the water. I checked my watch and looked for exactly 20 seconds, then turned away. What is that? Sarah asked. A light on the water, don't watch it for more than 30 seconds. Why? Because the rule says so. She looked at me like I was insane. Maybe I was, but I was still here and Jonathan wasn't. At 4:56 a.m., 7 knocks. Logged, I said. Thank you, came the voice from outside. Welcome, Sarah. Sarah's face went white. How did it know my name? I don't know. Don't open the door. I logged it. 0456. 7 knocks. Voice said, thank you and welcome, Sarah. Did not open door. Voice knew trainee's name. On Sarah's second night, she was quiet and compliant. She followed every rule exactly. At 3:34 a.m., the man in the maintenance uniform appeared. She watched him for 10 seconds. That's not right, she said. What? His shadow, it's pointing the wrong direction. The spillway light is to his left, but his shadow goes left too. I looked. She was right, I'd never noticed. Don't communicate with him, I said. I won't. On Sarah's third night, she worked alone while I observed. She performed every check perfectly. When the voice came on the radio at 2:59 a.m., her own voice calling for help, she switched to channel 6 without hesitation. At the end of the shift, I signed off on her training log. Marcus read it and nodded. She'll do, he said. Sarah looked at me. How long have you been doing this? 67 nights. How long are you planning to do it? I didn't have an answer. I worked alone again after that. Sarah took the weekend shifts. Marcus said we needed separation, that having 2 people too close to the anomalies was a risk. On my 71st night, I realized I'd stopped questioning the rules. I'd stopped trying to understand. I just followed them mechanically, efficiently. I'd become part of the system. On my 78th night, the lights went out at 1:47 a.m. This time, during the darkness, something breathed against the door. Low and steady, like wind through a gap. It lasted until the power returned at 5:09 a.m. On my 82nd night, I found a new amendment in the binder. If you complete 90 consecutive shifts, you must take a mandatory week off. During this time, a substitute operator will maintain the facility. Do not attempt to contact the control room during your absence. I was at 82, 8 more nights. On my 87th night, I found a blank page at the back of the binder. I understood what it meant. I took out a pen and started writing, Operational Guidelines, Midnight Shift Only. I numbered the rules starting with the original 14. I added every amendment I'd learned, every protocol I'd memorized. I included times and specifics and measurements. I wrote about the knocking patterns and the false voices and the man in the maintenance uniform with the wrong shadow. I wrote about the supply inventory and the water level drops and the reservoir light. I wrote about what happens during power failures. At the bottom, I added, follow these exactly. I opened the reservoir window once and I saw what waits below. The rules are not suggestions, they are the only thing keeping you from joining them. M. I didn't open the window, not yet, but I understood now that eventually I would. Everyone did. The dam demanded it. You could only follow the rules for so long before you needed to know why. Marcus read my addition the next morning. He looked at me for a long time. You wrote that you opened the window, he said. I will, eventually. Why would you do that? Because I need to know what I'm protecting. You'll lose time, like Jonathan, like all the others. I know. Marcus closed the binder. When you do it, make sure Sarah can cover your shifts. On my 90th night, I was supposed to go on leave. Instead, I convinced Marcus to let me work one more shift, just one. He didn't argue, he knew. At 3:34 a.m., I unlocked the reservoir window latch. The window swung open on hinges that hadn't been oiled in decades. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of deep water and concrete and something else, something mineral and old. I looked out at the reservoir. The light was there, right on schedule, closer than it had ever been, maybe 20 feet from the window. I could see what it was illuminating clearly now. Faces, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands, pressed against the underside of the surface like people trapped beneath ice. All of them looking up, all of them waiting. They weren't drowning, they were suspended, caught in the moment of crossing over, frozen in the boundary between here and somewhere else. I saw Jonathan. I saw Harold Sims. I saw people in clothing from decades past, from different eras. I saw the man in the maintenance uniform, his face finally visible, eyes empty and pleading. And I saw myself, not a reflection. Another me pressed against the surface with all the others, mouth open in a silent scream, hands reaching up. The version of me that had broken the rules, the version that had failed. I looked at him, at me, for what felt like hours but was probably seconds. He looked back. Our eyes met, and in that moment I understood. The dam didn't hold back water. It held back choices. Every decision we made created a branch, a split, a fork in reality. Most of those branches dissolved harmlessly. But some, the ones where we made catastrophically wrong choices, had weight. They had mass. They accumulated here in this thin place pressed against the barrier. The rules weren't protecting us from monsters. They were protecting us from ourselves, from the versions of us that made the wrong choices and got trapped in the consequences. I slammed the window shut and locked the latch. I sat in the chair and shook. At 4:56 a.m., 7 knocks on the door. "Logged," I said. My voice was steady. "Thank you," came the voice. Then, "You understand now." I didn't respond. At 6 a.m., I unlocked the door and walked out into the dawn. Marcus was waiting by the access road. He looked at me and knew. "How long were you gone?" he asked. "What do you mean?" He checked his watch. "You opened the window at 3:34 a.m. It's 6:47 a.m. now. Your shift ended at 6. I looked at my watch. He was right. I'd lost 47 minutes, not 2 weeks like Jonathan, but enough. "What did you see?" Marcus asked. "The other versions, the ones that didn't follow the rules." He nodded. "And I saw myself. That's why the rules exist. Every night you follow them, you stay on this side. Every night you don't." He gestured at the reservoir. "You end up there. How many of me are down there?" "I don't know. How many times have you almost broken a rule?" I thought about it. The nights I'd almost looked at the maintenance road during the forbidden window. The nights I'd almost responded to the voice on the radio. The nights I'd almost opened the door. Dozens of times. Dozens of versions of me trapped in the consequences. "I'm taking my week off," I said. "Good." I drove home. I slept for 16 hours. When I woke up, I called Sarah. "I need you to cover my shifts for a week," I said. "Everything okay? I need time to decide if I'm coming back." She was quiet for a moment. "Did you break a rule?" "No. I followed one I shouldn't have." "Which one?" "The one that says you can open the window if you're willing to pay the price." I took the week off. I spent it trying to be normal. I went to movies. I ate at restaurants. I tried to sleep without setting alarms for every hour to check locks and latches. It didn't work. On the 7th day, I drove back to Dunmore Dam. Marcus was waiting in the parking lot. "Didn't think I'd see you again." "Neither did I." "What changed?" I realized something. Those versions of me in the reservoir, they're not just failures. They're warnings. Every night I work, every rule I follow, I'm honoring them. I'm being the version of me they couldn't be. Marcus smiled. "Welcome to the long shift." I took the key, the radio, and the thermos. I walked the access road to the control room. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and locked it behind me. The binder sat on the desk, open to my addition. Someone had added a note below my entry. "Thank you for your service. The seal holds because of people like you. Sarah." Below that, in Marcus's handwriting, 94 consecutive shifts. Current record holder. Keep it up. I sat down in the taped chair and opened the binder to the checklist. At midnight, I started my rounds. I still work the midnight shift at Dunmore Dam. I've worked 163 nights now. I've trained 7 people. 4 of them made it past the first month. 2 are still here, working the weekends and covering my days off. I update the rules when necessary. I add amendments when the pattern changes. I keep the binder current because that's what you do when you're the one who stayed. The footsteps still come on the roof. The voices still call on the radio. The man with the wrong shadow still waves from the maintenance road. The light still moves on the water, and beneath it the faces still wait. I've learned to recognize some of them. Former operators who didn't make it. Maintenance workers who tried to help during the forbidden hours. Visitors who ignored the warnings. And versions of myself. Multiple versions now. I see new ones sometimes accumulating with each near miss, each moment I almost broke a rule. They're all down there, pressed against the barrier, waiting for it to fail. But it won't fail. Not on my shift. Because the dam holds back more than water, and the rules are all we have. And because somewhere beneath the reservoir, in the space between what is and what could have been, there are versions of all of us who didn't follow the rules. They're watching. They're counting on us to be better than they were. I see them sometimes when the light moves across the water during that narrow window at 4 a.m. They don't wave anymore. They just watch. And in their watching, I see something that might be gratitude. Or maybe it's just recognition. One version of me acknowledging another. I never wave back. But I keep the binder updated. I keep the logs precise. I test the locks every hour and monitor the instrumentation every 30 minutes. I count the knocks and measure the silences. I mark the supplies that appear and never consume them. I switch to channel 6 when the voices get too familiar. I follow the rules. Every single one, because on my shift the seal holds, and that's all that matters.